Okay, so it's 5:03. I think we're going to get started now. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third industry talk. It's really lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for coming. I know week 7 is a bit of a chaotic time, especially with exams and midterms and whatnot. I'm going to hand over to Olivia, who, like all our previous talkers, will be running the interview portion of the series. Throughout the talk, if you have any questions that you would like to ask Amanda, pop them in the chat and we'll come back to them at the end. So over to you, Olivia.
Thanks, Sophia. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third interview of the Industry Talk series. This is the third of the 4 interviews that you must attend in order to receive those 10 PEP hours. And then there's a quick feedback form that you'll have to fill out at the end of the last seminar. If you have any questions throughout the interview, like Sophia said, pop them in the chat. Today we are very honoured to have a representative from Probuild join us, Amanda Clements. Probuild has been sponsoring SUCE for the last 2 years, so they are a very important company to us. So welcome, Amanda. If everyone could turn their cameras on, please, to make Amanda feel more welcome, that would be greatly appreciated. So a little bit about Amanda. Amanda Clements has over 15 years experience in high-risk industries and tier 1 companies, and she's currently the executive manager in Hscq for Probuild. Amanda and her team generate solutions that are not only positively impact well-being, safety, environment and quality outcomes, but also many other outcomes such as improved productivity, efficiency and customer satisfaction. A little bit about Probuild is a tier 1 contractor offering end-to-end construction services for over 30 years nationwide in commercial, retail, education, sport, residential, government health, and more. So the first question for Amanda, could you please tell us a little bit more about your background and education?
Sure, thanks Olivia. Hi everyone, it's really awesome to join you all. So a little bit about me. For those who don't know, health and safety can be sort of part of a broader bucket, I guess, of functions within a business. So at Probuild, we encompass health, well-being, safety, and quality. There's a few other hats that I wear as well that don't necessarily fit into that, but corporate social responsibility is also part of that. And yeah, so I've been working in health and safety, specialising in that field for actually nearly 15 years, nearly majority of my career really. So
yeah, cool. I think it's really good to introduce the audience to health and safety, especially because I don't think we've been exposed to it a lot at university. So that kind of leads on to the next question. Could you explain a little bit to the audience what Hscq stands for and why is it so important, particularly within the building and construction industry?
Yes, sure. So I'm sure a lot of you have come across some kind of health and safety, material before, or, there's quite often it has a little bit of a negative connotation around it. It has a bit of a PR problem. Quite often health and safety is kind of like, seen as like quite boring and not cool. And, that's certainly my experience when I first started when I was 20, probably similar to the age of some of you guys. And I was actually working in sort of a contract administration role with a civil construction company. And there was only sort of by chance that I ended up in health and safety, and I thought, oh, I don't know if I really want, I care a lot about people, but I don't know if I want to be all about compliance and rules and, laws and all of this kind of thing. But what's really fascinating is actually health and safety is a lot more broader than that. And particularly there's a lot more involvement around sort of the psychological people space. So I've spent a lot of time studying and learning in the psychology field, and lots of other fields that I guess that you can go and study that you can use to really help you in a health and safety or a quality role. So yeah, I've done it, kind of followed the standard health and safety path. So I first started out doing a TAFE course, and then I did a graduate certificate in occupational hazard management. I'm now doing a master's at Griffith University in safety leadership. But I guess along that way, I've done a lot around positive psychology and different forms of psychology, and various other avenues as well. So it's quite a dynamic, kind of interesting area. But I guess just the one thing that I would reinforce is that what the perception that it might be, and what some of you guys might be familiar with, and certainly what it was probably 15, 20 years ago, has evolved a lot. And you know, there's some really cool, innovative type stuff that I get to be involved in at my level. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And hopefully you can share a bit about that today. So the next question, what does your role look like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I actually started with Probuild in November last year. So at the moment, I guess one of the most important things to do when you first come into a business, especially at a senior level executive role, is to really take the time to understand the business. And I think it goes for every role, new job that you find yourself in, is that there's a real pressure to sort of perform and produce and show results. And you know, at my level, it's like, we want to see the strategy, how are we going to change, you know, the whole business in the next 12 months, and there's a lot of emphasis on that. And so it's really important to kind of, you know, what I've been trying to do in the last 5 months is, I guess, stand firm in terms of listening, getting out and talking to everybody at the front line of the business, in the management level of the business, at all different functions, and just asking really good questions. So last week, for example, I was in Perth, went to visit Curtin University, which we're building some structures over there, and really, like, it could be one day I'd be like following the supervisor around, just asking questions, like having an amazing, you know, chat. Today I'm actually at a lot of the executives for health and safety get invited once a year to a conference. I'm actually in Brisbane right now, which I've kind of stepped away for this. Yeah, so it's very diverse, and, you know, it could be anything from a legal case, you know, we just got a letter about a potential prosecution, so there's some really negative things like that, unfortunately, that I have to deal with. But otherwise, most of it's very proactive in the kind of, you know, coming out with better ways of improving health and safety quality.
Yeah. Just as a follow-up question to that, how often do you travel around for your work, like across Australia?
So with Probuild, because it's mainly in Victoria, and I live in Melbourne, so there's 12 projects there, so that makes it a bit easier. But I do go to Sydney quite a bit. We've got 4 projects there, and then we've got one in Perth, one in Brisbane, which I've been spending a week last few weeks. So yes, I really like the variety, and yeah, it was a bit of a challenge after traveling so much for work. In the previous years than last year was a bit strange, but at the same time, I would say it's definitely not as glamorous as what you would think. If you guys can see my setup, I'm in the hotel room and my computer's on the ironing board. So worst coffee. So it's like, you know, you've got to get up at 5 in the morning and work 6 hours a night. So yeah, but there's definitely an upside.
That's pretty cool. The next question, why are the Hscq processes so important for an individual looking to become an engineer, and how does your team work with engineers to ensure that projects are created to high quality?
Cool. So for those, I'm sure you guys probably don't know, but in terms of, we're very lucky in Australia. Obviously, it's very different in other countries, but in Australia, around last year, there's 185 fatalities in Australia, and a lot of those were in construction. And unfortunately, even though the injuries overall have dropped, the fatalities, the number of people that are killed in workplaces in Australia, hasn't actually reduced for 5 years. So it's reduced, and then it's kind of slowed down. Yeah. And so, as your role as, you know, as engineers, what we quite often say in health and safety is a lot of attention tends to get put on the work front. So the actual people doing the work, say you're building a road and you've got road workers and they're building the road, a lot of its attention is put on them because, you know, they're physically delivering the work. but the most impact on health and safety happens upstream. So people that are designing the work, that are, you know, doing all the engineering, the client who asks you to do the work, like a lot of the time, like where the biggest benefit can happen is at that kind of end.
Yeah.
So for you guys as engineers, yeah, it's an amazing opportunity to have an impact, really positive impact, you know, kind of on people. And the difficulty is, I guess, you don't necessarily see that direct link, but it's 100% there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely everyone's issue to try and get right. I might just ask a question I was going to ask later on, but it sort of follows that. So safety is always an ongoing battle within the construction industry to ensure that it's maintained. Like you said, there's a high rate of fatalities in the industry. How do you feel about the changes that have already been made in recent years regarding safety on construction sites? And how do you think safety procedures need to be further improved?
Sure, yeah. So look, there's definitely been a huge improvement. There's no doubt about that over the last 20 years. But one of the challenges that we now have, particularly in high risk industries like mining and construction, is that it's become what we say, like it's become very bureaucratic. So there's a lot of like money that's spent on compliance, and companies tend to put in like so many rules and procedures and all this thing that they think is going to stop them from going to jail, you know, per se. But what actually happens is it makes things so complicated, and you know, it's not user friendly. And then you've got to, like, our engineers or project managers who then have all this stuff that they've got to try and follow and understand and get their head around. So my real passion is to create what we call human-centered design systems. And so a lot of that revolves around actually going to the point of the person that's using that process and involving them in the design of that process.
Yeah, for sure. So the next question is, in terms of Probuild, what do the process and systems look like to ensure a project is completed to a high quality standard? And what is your approach to improving Hscq in the workplace?
Yeah, so look, there's we have moved, you know, a lot, I guess, into trying to automate a lot of the processes. So using software systems to, for example, if you're doing a quality inspection on a contractor or someone that's performing the work, a lot of that is automated through a software system. So we try and, you know, it's taken a little while to, you know, upskill, say, like supervisors and contractors to use those systems. So that's always a bit of a barrier. But again, if you involve them early on enough, then they adopt it. But that obviously means that we can use a lot of sort of data analytics and machine learning to help drive, you know, better decision making. So there's been a lot of progress in that space. But for me, yeah, in terms of my approach, I spend a lot of time more, like, as much as systems and software and technology that you've always got the human element. And so understanding how people think and behave and make decisions and how to, you know, build relationships and things like that is really the core, like, fundamental thing. So I work a lot in that space.
Yeah. And is there anything like specific that you found in Probuild that they do slightly differently to other things that you've worked on, or?
Yeah, like, I probably would say they are so the company that I came from before was called Downer Group. So they're the biggest infrastructure company in Australia. And because it was such a big business, I guess the difference that I've found with Probuild, which is a little bit more of to me, it feels like more of a family kind of vibe, I guess, being a smaller business, is that the relationships between the teams and also the contractors that because a lot of our work is contracted out, you know, that they are the key to doing really high quality, you know, exceptional work. So, you know, I really love that side of it, and quite often that is sort of underestimated. Like, people think, oh, relationships, that's all fuzzy, but the thing is, if you don't have trust with somebody, or they don't feel comfortable to speak up, then you're really going to have very little influence or positive impact in what you're trying to do. Or if you've got a new engineering solution, for example, you know, and you're trying to influence somebody to take that on, if you don't already have sort of that relationship, then it's going to make it really hard. So
yeah. Has there been any examples of like a relationship that you had to try and connect with on a project that sort of didn't go well at first or anything like that?
Yes, you will always come across people who you just don't naturally get along with, but you have to work with, and you might not even like them. But the most important thing that I've always found is that if somebody doesn't like you or you don't have that relationship, then like I just said, you're really not going to get anywhere. So
yeah.
You know, there's certainly people that I've worked with and haven't agreed with their approach, but the most important thing that I found that works is just really getting to know the person on a personal level. Like we sort of, I don't know what you guys find at uni, but in the workplace, it can be a little bit kind of what we say transactional. So like, hi, how are you? How was your day? You know, it's not really like getting to know the person. So, you know, my advice in that space was if you're trying to have an impact or influence change, or, you know, just try and build some rapport and, you know, get to know the person. And then over time, you know, generally you find that relationship, you know, improves.
Yeah, for sure. I think as engineers, we are very focused on like the maths and everything, but it's also very important to focus on building relationships and stuff.
Yeah.
So you kind of touched on a little bit before, but your previous experience includes National HSE Manager at Downer. What's the major differences between a HSE role compared to Executive HSEQ Manager at Probuild now?
Yeah. So well, I guess at Downer, I worked mainly in the roads, construction and maintenance division for 10 years. And so I was a health and safety advisor there. So my role was a lot more, you know, hands-on. I was out on the projects all the time. And then I moved into more of a safety innovation role. And then coming into Probuild, my role is very like proactive, strategic sort of role. So yeah, there's definitely changes, but again, you know, like every business you work for, your workplace you find yourself in is going to be different. I think being like humble and not like making assumptions about, oh, well, I did this at the last company, so it's going to work here. No one ever likes that. So, you know, get to know the business and ask questions. That would definitely like, you know, be like a good piece of advice if you're going into a new company.
Yeah, for sure. Every company is so different. So I just have a few questions specific to Probuild now. As a recent employee of Probuild, like you said, how did the opportunity present itself to work there?
Yeah, so I was actually at the end of last year looking at going and starting my own consultancy business, and I was talking to a few recruitment companies. You guys will probably learn over the years that recruiters tend to follow you around and they try and, you know, keep in contact with people in the business. So just naturally through conversation, they were basically, you know, said that this role had come up, and I said their first question to me was, what kind of role would you like? And basically all the points I touched on was exactly what Probuild were looking for. So it was actually, you know, just a good timing, synchronicity thing. So yeah.
Fair enough. Would you ever want to go into your own business in the future?
Look, I still have that kind of, there's some programs and research that I've done that I'd really like to sort of elevate in the industry, and whether I do that off the side or as a business is, you know, but coming into this role, like, you know, you really need to commit at least, you know, 5 years to change your flow, and, you know, you just sort of got to commit and be present. And so that's kind of where I'm at the moment anyway. That's my entrepreneurial side has gone out the window for now.
That's all right. So what do you value most about working at Probuild?
So what I love about Probuild, what really drew me to the business, is they have their values really that are like really lived values around being bold, you know, not accepting mediocrity, and like I'm a real sort of critical thinker and want to have, you know, always wanting to look for to have a bigger positive impact. And so that really aligned with me in terms of, you know, they're always looking to innovate and push the boundaries and not just accept the status quo.
Yeah.
So that was definitely the number one reason for me. But and like very open to change, like, you know, our managing director Luke, who's awesome, he basically sort of said, well, go in, do your discovery work, and then you've almost got like a blank canvas in terms of what you think needs to be done. And so there's a lot of trust, and yeah, hopefully we can make a big difference in the next little while around health and safety.
Yeah, for sure. So not necessarily to Probuild, but what has been like your biggest challenge so far in your career, like on a project or something like that?
Oh, wow. My biggest challenge, I probably would say, like, so for the first few years of my, like when I was early 20s, I was a bit naive. I was just kind of getting my head around being in health and safety and what that all entailed. But as I got to learn more and I spoke to especially people who were doing the work, I would go out and, you know, get to know them and listen to them. I started seeing that the ways that we were doing things were really not what they needed. But I was sort of, you know, it wasn't just the business, it's the whole way that Australia and even other countries manage safety in that way. And so I could really see that, you know, there could have been a better impact, and we could be helping those people to be safer in a much better way. And I suppose it was a good 5 or 6 years where I felt like my values were misaligned with the way that health and safety was being managed. And yeah, I was actually about to start a new career, and there was a fatality on one of the teams that I was working in, and yeah, that led me down a whole another path of looking at better ways of doing things, and found, you know, you kind of just by being open and looking and being curious, I guess, I found a whole group of people across the world that had that like same kind of frustration as I did, and so I've been working with them to really drive sort of our profession forward. So yeah,
that's really good. There was a question in the chat from someone. So touching on earlier in the call, how do you manage balancing between relationships and work, especially when traveling across the country or internationally?
So, well, I guess, you know, the thing that I've always got to remember is that, and this is not just because it's my work, but it's my value around well-being, and my role is, it's not just physical safety, but it's health and well-being as well. So, you know, you really do have to practice what you preach. And construction is, you know, out of all of the industries, I'm sure probably similar to being in health as a doctor or something as well, like there is a lot of pressure and long hours and things like that. So I just try and lead by example and have very clear boundaries of what I'm going to do. And so especially when we teach leaders, we talk about, I don't know if you guys have come across this term, but like locus of control. And so I try to be very clear about what I can control and what I can't control. If you take on sort of too much on you of what you can't control, then you burn out and you become really stressed. And I've seen a lot of people go in that direction, unfortunately. And that, I think that just comes with experience as well, and having mentors and things like that. So
another question from the chat is, what would you recommend students who would want to join the same field as you do in order to have a similar position to yours? Like, how did you first get into it, and kind of the steps? Yeah,
so like there is a career path. So there's a standard certificate in workplace health and safety. What I would say is, because the profession's evolved quite quickly, is that the standard courses are really kept up to date with the modern contemporary safety approaches and theories. and research. So one of my good friends actually has just started he's created a specific program for health and safety professionals, and I can just share that information with you for anyone that's interested. There are some other really good short courses, so I'm happy to kind of share some details, and I'll pass that on to you guys.
Yeah, that would be really good. So just going back to another question in the chat, how do engineers work with the Hscq, and what would you change about how like both teams work together?
Mm-hmm. So I'll probably give you a really practical example. So one of the programs that I've created that rolled out at Downer, and we're going to roll it out here, is called, so if you just think about, like, a lot of emphasis tends to be put on, say there's an incident and we try and learn from the incident by doing an investigation.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, like, what we say is that's very reactive. You're just kind of reacting to things. So if we want to learn about the work, you need to, have sort of tools in your toolbox to kind of learn what's going on. So one of the programs I run is called Learning Teams, and the main thing about that is that we involve people who know the most about the work. So that means if we're trying to, like, you might have a problem that you're trying to solve. So for example, if we are, what's an example? So from my civil sort of side, when I was at Downer, we were trying to improve the way that like trucks moved around the site, and also reduce the risk of people on foot, like walking around, being hit by those vehicles. So rather than kind of management saying this is what we're going to do, we actually ran a learning team. We had, some engineers, we had the traffic control companies, the truck drivers, the health and safety sort of people, maybe like 10 people in the group, and we facilitate a workshop where you kind of look at the problem, you come up with some solutions, you workshop that, you come up with models, like it's very practical, and then you go and trial and implement things out in the field. So it's really just about involving people with different perspectives, who can be part of the solution.
Yeah, for sure. So the next question, how do you handle the tax and effects of more negative aspects of your job? For example, the prosecutions and stuff like that.
Look, I think, again, like, you could get very caught up in it, very sort of disappointed or emotional or whatever, but for me it's just like there's a process to follow, and it's part of my job, and something that I need to manage really well, and you're never alone. Like, we've got with all of those cases, we've got fully professional health and safety external lawyers that help us with that kind of thing. We've got a couple of cases going on at the moment, and it's definitely not my favorite part of my job, but it's also, you can take the learnings from that and then transfer that back to the workforce about, okay, well, this is what went wrong and this is the result, but here's what we can do to prevent it going forward, and work with people in the business to do around that.
And then just as a follow-up, when those things kind of happen, how do you find having connections with your work colleagues helps?
So when there's a legal, like, prosecution?
Yeah.
Well, I guess, like, so if there's a serious incident and then there might be a prosecution, or it might go to court, anybody involved in that situation would be involved in creating a case, whether to determine whether the company is liable or not. But we also, because what can quite often happen is when lawyers get involved, like, a lot of the kind of learning and the positive side gets kind of shut down. So what I try and do is balance that with, okay, we've got to deal with this legal case, but what are we actually going to do proactively and without blame? So the worst thing you can do is kind of blame any individuals unless it was completely like intentional or something like that. The main core message is that you want to create a safe, open space for people to talk up and learn about the situation, and then kind of move forward from there.
Yeah, yeah, it's really important, because I think particularly in the construction industry, it's a bit, you can't really avoid it. It always just pops up. So yeah. The next question, in your opinion, particularly for civil engineers, what soft skills do you think are most important, and how should we improve upon them?
It's a really topical question at the moment, actually, because even in health and safety, you look at the university course and everything like that, and it's very technical health, safety knowledge, but it really lacks in the term that I actually really like in soft skills is essential skills, because all of the research and everything that is coming out now about the future of work talks about those skills as being essential. And the number one thing that I would say would be building relationships, which I think I've hammered that home, but definitely influencing, which requires, I guess, understanding other people and being humble, and understanding the needs of other people in your team or whatever. So yeah, influencing is a really, really big one, really important one.
For sure, that's very important. So in 2020, for those who don't know, Probuild won the National Construction Master Builder of the Year. Given that Probuild have produced quality products, how are they ensuring that they continue to do so in the future in regard to quality assurance?
Yeah, so that project, it was actually the Ritz-Carlton in Perth at Elizabeth Quay.
Mm-hmm.
And so that project was actually built before I started, so I got to see the beautifully built project, but I have heard a lot about it in terms of why they won that award. So it was a very, very high-end, obviously being the Ritz, very beautiful kind of hotels and things. So it was over 400 rooms, very, very complex, intricate finishes and things like that. And the quality was done to a really, really high standard. So if you were to look at some of the key important factors in that, one is that because Probuild's been around for quite some time, we've built really good relationships with the subcontractors who are delivering the work, and our consultants and architects and things like that. We were able to select the right people who had a really high sort of quality and skill, and work with them to deliver that job. So
yeah, that's really good. The next question is, how did COVID influence your role in terms of the Hscq processes?
Yeah, so I was so I was still at Downer last year when through COVID, and so that was working on the roads and in the civil space. That was essential work, so we were actually working the whole time. And one really good thing to come out of it is that because there was such, I guess, urgency of different things, so our workers could keep working, we had to really, the government would say, oh, we've changed the rules, you now all need to have a permit, or you need to do this, you need to do that. And so it really created this, I guess, a bond between the team that were responding to that situation. And it's probably the most amazing sort of team work experience that I've had. And everyone had each other's back, and we're just contributing and digging in, and we'd be working until midnight trying to do stuff so that the work could keep happening the next day. And the workers are really grateful for that, because if we hadn't done things like that, they would have been not able to work and
yeah,
like that. So
that's a really good positive impact then. I wasn't expecting that answer.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to focus more on the positives, but yeah, that I'm sure that there's some negative. I mean, look, in the building industry, there's probably been a little bit more of an impact than infrastructure, but like industries always go through sort of like what we say peaks and troughs. So
Yeah.
they'll rebound pretty quickly.
Were there any specific COVID plans that were put in place? I think I know Probuild had one, but at Downer, were there any that you had to?
Yes, I think it was like death by COVID plans. It was almost like, how many times do you have to rewrite these plans and update them and, communicate them to team members and things. So, there was definitely a lot of paperwork. But again, when we had to put them together, we actually got the workers to contribute to that. It wasn't Amanda from the Hscq team saying, here's your COVID safe plan. It's like everybody's involved. So.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah.
The next question, what impact do you think engineers can have on Hscq outcomes now and in the future? Like, what should our role be going forward?
I think you guys have one of the most significant roles, to be honest, because, I think the opportunity to design things out or I don't know if you might not have come across it yet, but there's a concept called safety in design. And, if, like I sort of saying before, if you can design things in a way or engineer things in a way that later on or however they're built or however it's implemented is safer and can improve the quality or something like that, then that's much better than trying to fix something when the work is already happening. So yeah, absolutely, I would say, like, even though you might not see it, like I said earlier, I think actually one thing I would say is if you go into a workplace is try as much as you can to actually go to where the physical work is happening rather than kind of sitting in an office all the time making decisions and all of that, because I think you can make that connection between the impact that you can have from your decisions, positively or negatively, more than just kind of sitting in an office, behind a computer.
Yeah, for sure. How many times do you go to site in your job, like on a weekly basis, do you think?
Look, it really varies. Like, I could be like in Perth, I was pretty much out on site every day while I was there that week.
Yeah.
Some weeks I've got so many executive meetings and board meetings and client meetings that are not at all. But when I started this job, my goal was to spend at least one day a week from each project, which I've been able to achieve for the most part to date. So
that's really good. And do you prefer being in the executive meetings, or do you prefer being out on site with everyone?
I love being out on site with the guys because it keeps you very honest and humble. Like, you can be sitting with a board, for the most part, 50-ish middle-aged sort of men making very important decisions, and you step outside on the site for 5 seconds and you think, oh yeah, that's right. There's all these challenges and all these issues that they're dealing with, and kind of keeps you honest and humble, I think. So yeah, I love being outside.
For sure, I think I would too.
Yeah.
So just as a last question, before I hand over to Sophia, what advice would you give to graduates entering the workforce and who want to get into your role?
I think just for anybody coming into, let's just say as an engineer in construction or any role really, I think if you can be really curious and a really good listener, which unfortunately society kind of, I think, holds people up on more of a pedestal when you know more stuff. So we tend to talk more than listen. But you absolutely will learn more and be a better person and a better worker or a manager if you actually go and ask people questions about their job and be really curious about what made sense to them at the time that they were working, or tell me a little bit more about this, or oh, this is really interesting, how did you do that, rather than kind of, I guess, again, sitting in an office or a meeting making decisions about what you think is right for people. So yeah, that would definitely be my number one.
Yeah, it's very important to be proactive, I think. So thank you for that. That kind of concludes the more formal part of our interview. It was very interesting. I'll hand you over to Sophia now to begin the Q&A. Thanks, Amanda.
Awesome.
Hello. Okay. So we've gotten a fair few messages from the chat and I've gotten some PM to me. So before we get into those though, this is just my personal curiosity. I'll start with one of my own curious questions. You touched on this idea of the human element. And I think obviously us as civil engineers, we prefer our trusses and our buildings and our maths to humans a lot of the time. So I just wanted to to hear from you, how would you define like this human element and like why do you think it's important?
Well, I guess in any kind of, until we're all robots, which will happen, I'm sure. If you're designing something and you've got, say, all your maths and your process and this and that, at some point that you're going to have to go and talk to somebody or relate to somebody about that cool new idea or thing that you've designed. And it might, like what I've actually found, there's so many things that are genuinely really good solutions and have like lots of evidence behind them, but that actually can all go out the door if you don't have that kind of relationship side. So it's really, I think, underestimated. But what I would say, if you're happy to kind of just pump out things and ideas and this and that and not have an impact or not be successful, then don't worry about the people side. But I'm sure a lot of you, or most of you want to actually see an impact in society or the community with your work. And so I would say is, try and learn as much about people and behaviour and relationships and, all that as much as you can.
Definitely. And I think a lot of us kind of underestimate the importance of it, especially in uni, because we're all very, stuck in our workbooks and our classes. So it's really interesting that you consider it such a big element of the job. Kind of following up on that, we had a few questions specifically regarding this human design aspect. A question I think from Pauline was like, especially when working with your contractors or engineers, what are some of the difficulties you found in encouraging this attitude of human-centered design?
Probably the biggest challenge is, even with our most experienced, I shouldn't say even with, it's more likely to happen with the most experienced people, is that, there's a real, and again, it's about how we sort of have all grown up, I guess, but there's so much emphasis on, say, if somebody has been in construction or energy for 20 years, the pressure on them is to have all the answers, right? So to get them to go and actually involve the subcontractor in planning or, preparing for like the work, for example, it can be really hard sometimes because they've almost got to admit that, hey, maybe I don't know everything, which of course no one ever always does. So I spent a lot of time around working with leaders in terms of how they can relate more with or talk, kind of engage with some contractors and other people to get the best outcome for the job. And human-centered design is really a concept from, I've got onto it from sort of studying a lot around innovation. And so all of the research and everything points to the fact that if you're going to design something, you obviously need to consider the needs of the people you're designing it for. But unfortunately, that just doesn't always happen in particularly in health and safety, which is kind of crazy. But, yeah.
Do you reckon if there were more people in your role, that problem would be mitigated a bit more, or is it really just like a company structural thing?
Look, I just think it takes time for industry and big companies particularly to evolve. Like it takes a lot to kind of, I kind of use the term like a 2-degree shift. So I think people often kind of get caught up, they've got to make these big changes and we've got to change the world and I've designed this thing and it's going to, but if you just focus on trying to kind of make these little constant 2-degree shifts, like what you find is that eventually, you know, in a year or 2 or 3, you're in a completely better space than what you started. And of course, it's, you know, it's far less overwhelming for me as a manager to try and take on all of that, and rather just say, okay, well, I can actually change the world for the better just through one conversation at a time. That's kind of the statement that I use.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really poignant because, like you said, I think a lot of people will think, oh, I want to change the world, but the world's such a big place and you can't really change it in one go. But I think, like you said, trying to change it one bit in your own little corner is really the best we can do. Like a follow-up on that, you mentioned it's also to do very much with like the work environment. How much do you think that kind of people's work environment ties into health and safety, as in whether it's a positive work environment, as in environment and culture, so not just the physical environment but kind of cultural environment of a workplace as well?
Yeah, look, again, there's a lot that's spoken about, you know, workplace culture and culture this and safety culture that, and it can be a little bit of a sort of a, you know, I think it's easier to talk, for me, I talk a lot about, well, what are the things that you can do practically to impact that? And, you know, there's certainly, like, even if you just take, for example, if you've got a team that aren't working well together, and therefore they're not going to communicate very well, and therefore you could, you know, if you were communicating better, you could solve a problem in a different way, that it could have a significant impact on the way that the work is delivered down the track, right? So, you know, even just like if you guys are doing group work or something, I'm sure some of you think like that's my worst nightmare, but I would, it was when I was at uni, don't worry. But what I would say is just try as much as you can to get out of your comfort zone and actually really try and like fall in love with it in a way, because teamwork is what will drive everything in the workplace. And if you're just kind of always say, oh, I'm not good at that, and like you'll just keep having that mindset, and yeah, I think there's so much opportunity to gain in that space.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as engineers, we do a lot of group work. So we're definitely kind of getting used to this idea of like, we work better in teams, not necessarily as a lone wolf, which is I think a really wonderful part of the discipline, in my opinion. I just want to ask a question from Joshua, which is a bit of a different track, but they've asked how you think things like emerging technology will have an impact on how we approach health and safety, particularly in the civil engineering context.
Yeah, well, I guess firstly on the tech side is like, even at the conference that I'm at now, you know, they're talking a lot about, well, you guys probably know this term. Well, I was like, I have no idea what they're talking about, but I'm going to go Google it later. But they were talking about digital twins. So there's all this kind of terminology and stuff that, you know, I don't know, goes right over my head, but it makes me curious to go and learn. So there's a lot that's been, particularly around, you know, machine learning, and wearables is a big thing, or becoming a bigger thing, I suppose. What else? I've seen all sorts of, like, especially in COVID, there were people using sort of, you know, the Google Glass type situation where rather than people like a manager, rather than like a worker trying to explain to a manager who couldn't come out to the site what the situation was, they could actually visually see the site. And of course, that's going to help like better decision making. So there's so much, I think, stuff on the radar, or like stuff around now that's not been adopted, but yeah, I'm sure that's going to grow massively. In the civil space, probably some cool stuff I've seen around drones being used. So to prevent people having to get in sort of dangerous situations or areas or work environments, like out under a bridge or something. Yeah, we've used drones, and also like when we're doing inspections on the road to pick up issues with the road pavement, rather than the person getting in and out of the car all the time. Now they've got 360-degree cameras that stitch that all together and analyze it all, and it's all very fancy.
Damn, that sounds so cool. I had no idea any of that existed. Like I knew drones from, I don't know, you take pretty drone pictures, but I had no idea if they were being applied like that, particularly in the safety realm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's insane. Another question I had, this you kind of touched on this before, but a question I got PM'd from Sangeetha is, in terms of your personal like challenges over the years, particularly since starting this job, what would you say was like your greatest like personal or industry challenge, and how did you overcome it?
Look, I would probably say, I might even actually reframe it as an achievement, because like being an optimist, but like obviously working as I'm going to say when I started as a younger female, like working in a very male dominated environment, with, you know, more of a lean towards, I guess, like older people. I don't know if that's really PC, but I'm probably even in that group now. But, you know, certainly females are in the very small percentage of people in construction. So that was definitely a challenge in terms of, for me, it was about like staying true to myself. Like I'm not someone that's very, you know, like that likes conflict or kind of really direct or anything like that. Like I'm just more, I guess, caring and try and be kind. So, and that's kind of didn't really fit with the general mold of like being a leader in the construction industry. But I always felt like, yeah, I just wanted to stay true to who I was. And I'm really proud that like even before I was 35, I was an executive manager. So I think that goes to show that, you know, you can really stay true to yourself and work to your strengths and not try and kind of fit within this mold that you think that you need to be in. So
yeah, that's incredible. And I think obviously Olivia and I and a lot of the other people in this chat can resonate. Sometimes being like a girl in a very male dominated environment can be really intimidating, and you, especially when there's a culture of like you need to be really rough and tough and brutal to be a good leader. How would you say that in terms of you mentioned that obviously you value traits of being kind and caring. How did you kind of make that fit in that kind of really brutal corporate environment?
Well, I guess the irony is like, at the end of the day, everybody wants to be listened to and cared for, you know, so people kind of put on this exterior, kind of put on their armor, so to speak. But when I just lead by example and, you know, show that I care and that I'm interested and that I value their opinion, you know, I think over time that culture starts to change, and that people see that you still drive good outcomes and results without getting big stick out or anything like that. And ironically, like, because I've studied a lot around human motivation, actually, you know, like giving people consequences or using the big stick kind of per se actually decreases performance. So there's, you know, a huge amount of research about it, but, you know, at the end of the day, we're like human, you know, people want to kind of be careful. So
yeah, that's incredible. And I think it's kind of very reassuring, because I'm not the type who's like really mean or not very good at really beating people with a stick. I'm sure a lot of us are. It's especially in this day and age. I think no one really wants to be the one person beating others with a stick. So it's reassuring to know that even if you don't fit into that kind of type, there's still a place for you in construction and engineering, particularly.
Like if anyone's like kind of interested in that, what I would suggest looking up is like, so what we say, there's extrinsic motivators versus intrinsic motivators. And so people often look to intrinsic as rewards or like, you know, bonuses and, you know, all these kind of things, but it's actually intrinsic motivators that have the biggest impact on people's performance. So, you know, that's kind of the sort of stuff that I teach leaders about. So
yeah, definitely. That's incredible. I will be Googling that afterwards. But I think this kind of wraps up the Q&A portion. Thank you so much for your wonderful responses, even with my rambling. I'm
Of the questions, great Q&A. I mean, even like at these conferences, people don't ask that many good questions. So,
well, that makes us very happy. I'm going to quickly hand over back to Olivia, who will wrap things up for today. So,
thanks, Sophia. Great Q&A. So the link to the attendance form is in the chat now, if anyone missed it. And then next, we also have our industry night coming up in a few weeks. So the Facebook link is in the chat now. And also if you'd like to purchase tickets, they're now on sale. Thank you everyone for coming. Big thank you to Amanda. You did very well.
And I'm going to do a really bad impression of a celebrity and try and take a photo, because then I can then I can tell people how cool it was hanging out with you guys. So are you ready?
Yeah.
People can see that I'm talking to you guys from an ironing board.
And then yeah, I'll just take some photos, some screenshots for our social media too.
I'm also really happy if anyone had any other questions or wanted to ask, if you find me on LinkedIn, if you guys are on LinkedIn, or grab my email or something, that's totally cool.
For sure. Thank you, Amanda. So yeah, that concludes the third interview. Next week, we also have the third interview for the academic series. So if you're a part of that, make sure you come. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
thank you so much, Amanda. That went really well. That was incredible, especially because I think a lot of us don't have as much background in this kind of like health and safety thing, but even though it ties in a lot with our it actually ties in so much with civil engineering, and it's such an important part of our jobs, but we don't really learn much about it beyond, I don't know, the standards or footnotes in class.
Yeah, I've actually been, a little while ago, I spoke to the Health and Safety Institute of Australia about, because they do a lot of sort of promotional educational stuff, and about what work is done with unis. Because yeah, it kind of just really interests me to do this kind of stuff and actually come and talk to people about like the practical progressive side and how things have advanced, rather than sort of your stock standard 101 cookie cutter stuff. So yeah, anyway, this is a good little experiment, and if you guys get good feedback, maybe I'll look at doing some more with some universities or something.
Of course, we'd love to have you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'll just
Amanda, thank you so much, Amanda.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, yeah, I'll talk to Nick, and yeah, if you guys need anything, just let me know.
Thank you. Will do.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
bye.